do go back, and I have known you obviously for quite some time. And so I've been kind of around to see your journey through nutrition, through health, fitness, all that kind of stuff. And then more recently, you've made a transition into real estate, but you've always had some involvement in real estate, right?
Yeah, I've been passionate about real estate for a long time. You know, it really goes back to about 2005 is when I first got involved in real estate. So when I was in college, I got recruited at Creighton to sell insurance and investments in the financial world. So I worked with Northwestern Mutual for a number of years, and it was like this repeated thing. I kept seeing, you know, very wealthy, successful people that were involved in real estate. And so I was interested in it. And then growing up, my best friend's dad owned a bunch of rental houses. And he was like an attorney. He didn't practice law anymore. Then he has an appraiser's license and his real estate license. And so he was very heavily in real estate. And, you know, at the time, I think, you know, at the height, he might have owned 50 or 60 rental houses and just managed it all himself. I mean, super old school.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of fascinated by how that worked. And I think for me, you know, I got into insurance and investments. I had no interest in that world. I've always been interested in investments, but I didn't really want to sell insurance and investments. I just got interested because it was like the holy grail is like to create a residual, to create, like to do the work once and get paid over and over.
Yeah.
And I think real estate is like essentially the ultimate potential for residual.
It
And so
can
that's,
be,
so that's kind of what drew me in, if you will.
Did you realize that at the age of 25 that there was that income potential?
Yeah.
Residual income? Because that was not something that I was privy to until like my 30s. Like, oh, let's build something that like, you know, the money shows up and I don't have to think about it.
Right.
You were aware of that at an early age?
I was pretty fascinated and interested with like investing in money at an early age. But I was super passionate about health and wellness and nutrition. And so I had this like inner conflict, like, go chase money or do what you love, you know? And I was kind of like, always had this inner conflict about which way I should go. And right out of college, I went down the financial world, but then eventually, you know, in 2009, I kind of started my business and went the other way, and then now here I am.
Right.
So, yes, I was interested in that, and the reason is because when I was like a junior in college, I went to this presentation, and this dude in this great suit was like, "Hey, I'm going to teach you guys how to make residual income, do the work once, and get paid forever." And it was kind of like, you know, a cheesy presentation, but I was like, "Wait, what does this mean? You know, what is this? How does this work?" And I'm like, "Insurance? That sounds boring as shit." But I'm like, wait, you sell it once and you get paid over and over? Like, that's awesome. And so that was the first time I ever remember hearing that. I was a junior in college. I had no interest in really like doing the job, but then once I saw how the pay worked, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So it took me down that path. Well, what you don't realize is how much work it is, right? Like it's very hard, it's not fun. And so
It's a grind.
Yeah, it's a grind. I mean, I did well, but I just didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, you didn't love what you were doing every day, but the payout was worth it.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's when I first heard residual income. And then I think fast forwarding several years, you know, like I said, I kept having clients in that world that were wealthy, that had money. And I was like, one of the common denominators was real estate. And I was like, all right, let me look more at this. Like, how does this work? And so then that's what kind of got me interested in the whole rental thing.
I think what's interesting about you is that you seem to have, as far as looking from the outside, you seem to have these interests, right? Like you said, that not conflict with one another, but are two totally separate things, right? If you're looking at it from the outside world, what does health and wellness have to do with real estate, right? But in my mind, and I think you would probably echo this, is that to be a successful business owner, entrepreneur, you've got to be the best version of yourself.
Right.
Because if you don't have the energy to keep up every single day, like you're not going to be able to be as successful as you possibly could.
Right.
So I see that kind of overlap. I mean, you feel the same?
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think you're spot on there. And I think, so when you look at the relationship between real estate and what I did, I really look at what I did as optimization. Because people would always say, like, what do you do? Like, are you a trainer? No. Are you a nutritionist? No. Like, what I would look at is like the overall picture and try to help people optimize their life. Like everything outside of the gym, even the gym is a huge part of it. So, you know, you're looking at functional medicine, lab testing, gut health, inflammation, hormones, sleep, stress, toxicity, like all these things, right? And so what I started to realize is that actually I spent a long time working with professional athletes, and that was good, but it's stressful and tons of travel. And then I kind of went down this path on accident where I started working with more and more executives, business owners, like successful people. I kind of call them for a while, like my old rich fat guys, you know, like because they were like made all this money and then they're scared, like, oh shit, I better change.
Right. I'm not going to be able to enjoy this if I
Right.
don't get my ass in gear, right?
Right. So they would kind of hire me and that became really good clientele. And then I started realizing I would always have these like entrepreneurial business conversations with them, and they kind of liked that, like I got it. I wasn't just like some bro at the gym,
Right.
like telling them to lift weights. I like understood the whole picture, and I could relate to them why they need to have energy and why they need to perform the way they do. So when I look at it, I've realized that like my passion is really optimization. Like anything you do, how can you do it better? How can you optimize your performance?
Yeah.
And I think real estate is something that a lot of people who have wealth or are trying to create wealth or want long-term wealth, they use that as a tool because it's optimal to create long-term freedom and long-term wealth.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I see the two combined, is they both play a role in optimization. And then if you look further at health and wellness, it's not cheap. Like I mean, you can do a lot like without money, but you kind of need money to do some things.
Absolutely. If,
you know?
if you're, well, I think if you're going to do anything, you do it right.
Right.
So you got to put some money into it.
Right.
I mean, if you're starting out and you don't have a lot, you can train yourself, I guess. But like, yeah, you want to work with an expert.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that like when I think of like, you know, I spend a lot of money on food. I spend a lot of money on supplementation. I spend a lot of money on, you know, probably twice a year functional medicine lab testing that insurance doesn't cover. You know, I've used peptide therapies. I've used I've spent a lot of money on stuff that like the average person probably wouldn't spend money on.
Okay.
And so at the end of the day, like if you want to be optimal, like you probably have to invest in it, you know?
Well, there's that level of just kind of day-to-day basic care, right? You go to your physician, you go to your family doctor, your primary doctor, whatever.
Right.
But in my experience, they don't quite dig in as much as some of the stuff you're talking about, right? Like I want to hear about peptide therapy, whatever you were saying. But, you know, with blood tests, lab panels, all that kind of stuff, it digs deeper, and there is more to learn from, you know, gut health, and there's lots of ways to test that you don't do at the normal doctor's office. So you're right. It takes money.
Yep.
Yeah.
It takes money. I mean, the biggest thing that people need to understand is that, like, just because you're absent of disease doesn't mean you're healthy. So, like, the standard doctor is just going to be like, okay, Carrie, like, boom, boom, boom. You got 7 minutes. Like, you don't have XYZ. You're good. Come see me next year.
Right.
But, like, they're not looking at wellness, you know, so like wellness, optimization, and health are different, you know, than what traditional medicine looks at. Traditional medicine simply looks at disease. Yeah. Do you have disease? Okay, then get out of my office. Like if you don't have disease, then why are you here?
Yeah.
Right.
Take you to a specialist, and then it's that whole
100%. So it's like, you know, it's just one of those things where I think people need to understand that like just because you don't have a disease doesn't mean you're healthy, doesn't mean you're optimal. Okay. And so my whole thing is like taking a look at the entire situation and saying like, hey, how can we feel, look, perform our best? You know, and so if you're a mom, that's one thing. If you're a business owner, that's another. If you're a young athlete, that's another. But like there's some overlapping principles that must, you know, apply to all those people. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is just most people, even like successful people with money, have never had the blood work done that I would suggest. Like never. Because like, oh, I went to my doctor, he's healthy. Oh, what are you talking about, man? My doctor's my friend, he knows what he's doing. It's like, all right, he knows what he's doing, but like he knows what he knows. Like your doctor studies disease, he studies his specialty at that. You know, so if whatever he may be, like that's what he knows, but he has not taken time to like really look at gut health, to really look at hormones, to really look at toxicity, to really look at sleep. In fact, when I first started doing what I was doing in 2009, 2010, people's doctors thought I was freaking nuts. I mean, I would give people a list of lab work to go get, and their doctor would like fight with them and be like, this is stupid. Why are you spending money on this? This is BS. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. That was 2009, 2010. By 2013, 14, I had over 50 physician clients that had personally hired me to work with their wife or their family or them or their kids or somebody, because they started to realize, oh shit, this is legit. Like there's actually science behind this. Like just because your doctor hasn't read the science doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Yeah. You know, and so it's one of those things where I think a lot of people just need to like take a step back. And the other thing, you know, with a real estate analogy that I tell people is that like you need to be your own general contractor. So like you need to treat your doctor and maybe your chiropractor, massage therapist, or maybe even a functional medicine doctor. You should be seeing all these people. And like each one of them might have something to add. Just like if you build a house, you're gonna have HVAC, plumber, electrician,
Right.
Whatever. So yeah. Yep.
That makes sense. So, I mean, if someone is kind of on the outside looking in at, okay, I'm curious about my health beyond kind of these checkpoints, right? That my doctor says are important, and as long as I'm good there. If they want to get into learning more, I want to ask like where you would have them start or what kinds of things they do need to dig into. But real quickly, I want to make the point, and I, again, think you would agree, most people don't do that until something is wrong, until they feel it.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So you can be preventative.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What would you have them look at?
100%. So traditional medicine is 100% reactive. Traditional medicine is 100% reactive, meaning that like you have a problem, you come to me, I see a lab that's off, I then give you a drug or you do a surgery. That's about it, right? Yeah. And thank God for traditional medicine, because I probably would have died if there wasn't traditional medicine, Like I have my own story where traditional medicine really probably saved my life. So traditional medicine has a place and it's freaking amazing. If I get in a car accident or if I have a freaking tumor on my liver, take my ass to the hospital. But if I want to be optimal, feel, look, perform my best, do not take me to the hospital, right? Like take me somewhere else where I can learn those things. So to answer your question, where should a person start? I mean, here's the deal. Like, if you're willing to invest and you're serious, like the first place I would tell most people to start is getting functional medicine lab testing. And so, for example, there's a guy if you're in the Omaha area, there's a guy in Bellevue named Dr. Biscup. I refer all my people to. He's amazing for men or for women. He was a traditional trained MD family practice guy for years. He went back, got a ton of training in like functional medicine lab testing and functional medicine. He'll look at everything. He'll use drugs where needed. He'll use supplements and diet where needed. But he's very open, and he's a guy that he's a doctor. He's in his 60s and probably mid to late 60s, and he's always asking me like, "What are you learning? Like, what's new? Do you have any articles you can send me? Do you have any books? Do you have any podcasts?" Like, he's always asking me stuff. It's very rare for a traditionally trained doctor in their late 60s to be asking anyone that, much less somebody who's not a doctor, right? Yeah. But I've taught him a ton. He's taught me a ton, and there's respect there. So the first thing I would do is start with functional medicine lab testing, and that will look at all your hormones. That will look at inflammatory markers. That could look at gut health. It could look at, a lot of times for men especially, but also women, you want to look at your lipid profile, like your cardiac heart stuff. One of the biggest things that people look at is just look at like total cholesterol, whereas like that's not a good marker really of anything. And so you want to break that down much further and get more detailed labs. You want to look at like particle count, particle size. You want to look at ratios. You want to look at just a lot more stuff than the average doctor is going to look at. So starting with functional medicine lab testing would be a great place to start. If you don't have that in your budget, then I think you have to start with diet. Like the next thing is starting with diet. And then from there, I think the next thing would be sleep. So diet and sleep are like the first place everybody could start. Everybody wants to start with working out. They want to hire a trainer. Yeah. But in reality, it's like get a baseline labs, eat right, start sleeping, and then get your workouts in check. And then from there, those things are very synergistic, and you're gonna get way better results.
You'll notice a difference.
Right.
In terms of diet, if I'm kind of just everyday Joe off the street, do you recommend some sort of elimination diet? Like if I'm not feeling well, if I don't have a lot of energy, if I hit that 2 p.m. like, oh my God, I'm crashing, do you recommend like maybe start with taking out gluten, maybe start with taking out dairy?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Like I think if you're a person, and a lot of times I get approached about this with kids. Like a mom comes to me and says, hey, like my kid's having XYZ. So for example, if your kid's having like behavioral issues, learning issues, if anybody's having skin issues, joint pain, fatigue, autoimmune symptoms are crazy. There's a huge list, right? Yeah. So like there's so many different things that could be autoimmune and I've had a ton of autoimmune symptoms, no disease. Like again, doctors, oh, you're fine, you don't have disease. Well, shit, I'm not fine. I feel like hell.
Right.
Like I'm not fine. Yeah. So that's one of those things where, again, the traditional doctor might not help you. So yes, an elimination diet is a great place to start. And so that doesn't cost any money. It just takes some time. Yeah. And so what I would do is and if it's like a really sick person, you could get as strict as literally going on like a straight meat, like grass-fed beef. Like all you have is grass-fed beef for like 3 to 5 days. You could try to have some variations. Mm-hmm. And then you start to bring in like different types of meat or fish, or you start to bring in vegetables. Right. But I mean, I would tell anybody who's having health issues, eat meat and vegetables for like, if you could make it 14 days, that'd be great. Mm-hmm. And then bring back like one thing in, okay. Bring back in white rice or white potato and here's the deal, like nightshades and a lot of different vegetables people don't do well with. So like, nightshades are a type of vegetable, and certain vegetables have, okay, so taking a step back, there's most supplements come from plants, mm-hmm. right? So plants have different nutrients or chemicals in them that are protective of the plant, so the seed can grow and can flourish and can reproduce. Okay. And so those chemicals can actually be somewhat inflammatory or harmful for people who have autoimmune disease. The average person who's fine, who has great gut health, is not going to be affected, but a person who has autoimmune disease or symptoms could be affected by that. And so certain plants, vegetables, are going to create an inflammatory or an immune response in people that could be negative. Mm-hmm. Now, that's most likely in grains. So most grains, a lot of people are reactive to them, so they're pro-inflammatory. The one that we always hear about is gluten. And so gluten is the protein from wheat that has been hybridized and changed. And the reason people say, oh, well, my grandparents never had this problem. Well, they weren't eating the same stuff that we are. Mm-hmm. It's been completely changed and modified.
As processed, right?
Yeah, Monsanto wasn't around when grandma was around, And, and if you also look at like our grandparents ate a super high fat diet, mm-hmm. lard and raw cream and butter and whatever. They didn't have any of this bullshit like fake butters and fake sugars and whatever. They ate like meat and potatoes, and they put a bunch of butter on stuff, mm-hmm. and that was normal, and like heavy cream, and
it was real food.
It was real food. Yeah, it was real food. Like it might have been higher fat, but it was real food. And so like that's one of the biggest things that I don't like, is that like fat is villainized. Like fat's not the problem. Like if it's coming from properly raised animal sources or more natural sources, like if you're getting man-made seed oils, which is like canola oil, cottonseed oil, things like that are like highly processed man-made fat oil, that's bad. Those are pro-inflammatory. But like if you have like raw dairy, cream or grass-fed beef or wild-caught fish, the fats in those things, that's not the problem. And it's overly villainized because people just group fat as like one big bad thing. Yeah.
There's good fats, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, people
Absolutely.
talk about, avocados and, like you said, salmon, fish, omega-3
Yep.
fatty acids, all that kind of
Yep.
stuff. So, yeah, I think what's interesting to me is when I go to the grocery store, I get like very conflicted because fat has been, like you said, villainized. And so then you see these processed foods that say like lower fat, less
Right.
fat, and you're kind of tempted to grab for those. But generally then what you're trading out is the chemicals, right?
Yeah.
The process. So it's kind of like, okay, I choose the fat or the cancer potentially,
Right.
or the inflammatory. So it's a hard thing, I think, for
Right.
most people to know what to buy. I've always kind of heard stay to the outside of the
Yep.
grocery store, right? Because that's where
Yep.
your real foods are.
Yep.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you recommend in terms of going to the store? I want to start, if I'm starting with food, right? If
Right.
I'm starting with diet.
Right.
What do you kind of tell people to start with? I mean, if they're
Yeah.
switching from a high fat, like high bad fat diet
Right.
to a good fat diet.
So the biggest thing that I talk about, and I've talked about this many times, in like if you are eating a standard American diet and you do anything, you're probably going to get improvement, right? So if you do a keto diet, a paleo diet, a vegetarian, a vegan, a pescatarian, like you name it. Like if you do any diet, and even count macros, like if you just move the needle from standard American diet towards anything, you're going to make progress, mm-hmm. right? You're going to feel better. You're going to get results. So the thing is like we get these people that make a little bit of improvement and they think that, oh my God, like my diet's the only way, like it has to be this way. And like, I'm probably guilty of that 10 years ago, like thinking that like, I was a big fan of a paleo type diet, which is the real food diet, meat and vegetables. I still am a fan of that. Now, do I realize that like there's other things that can work for people? Absolutely. But my advice to people is, one of my mentors and friends, Sean Croxton, trademarked the term JERF, just eat real food. And it like sounds simple, but it's like, just eat real food, like meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, properly raised animal proteins, like just eat real food. And there's tons of variations and fun things you can do with that, but it's a little bit more work than buying the packaged food. So here's the thing, like I always start people off, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that people get is, and there's so many really smart people online, and there's tons of people like in the fitness world who are obsessed with calorie counting and macros, okay? And that absolutely works and has a place. So I'm not saying that doesn't work or like that shouldn't be a part of it, but for the person who's like the standard American diet just moving in the right direction, like that's kind of overwhelming to weigh and measure all your food, okay? So like if you're a competitive athlete or you're pretty far advanced, I think that's a good model for the person who likes that. Most people will never be able to stick with weighing and measuring food for any length of time. So what I tell a new client who used to come on and work with me, I would say, hey, look, well, let's do this. I'm gonna give you some parameters and you can eat whatever you want, as much as you want, but you just have to eat real food. So for the next 3 days, you're gonna send me a picture of everything you eat. You can eat as much as you want, as late as you want, as early as you want. You can do anything, but you can only eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, no sugar, no processed foods. Let me know how it goes. And they're like, shit, okay, I can do that, because you don't have to count anything, you don't have to measure anything. Eat as much as you want. I don't give a shit if you have 2 steaks, like every meal, like you won't, but like you could if you want, right? So I always tell people, we're gonna do that for 3 days. You're gonna check in with me. And then if it goes well, we're gonna extend it for the first 7, and then we're gonna have another phone call. And we're gonna check in. 99.9% of people who do that feel better. And they're like, dang, it was pretty easy. Like I had to prepare food, I had to plan ahead, but it was pretty easy. And I say, okay, here's the deal. Now on week 2, what we're gonna do is we're still not gonna count any calories, we're still not gonna count macros, but I wanna just tighten things up a little. Like it looks like you were kind of going crazy on the fruit, or you had way too many sweet potatoes or whatever. So I wanna get a little bit more aware of a balanced meal. Okay, so like I want you to have a properly raised animal protein with some vegetables and maybe like a small amount of a starch, like a yams or sweet potatoes or squash or something like that, like if it's a dinner. And we get a little bit more dialed in, and then I say, but don't worry, because like we're not gonna start counting calories and macros until like next week, right? Yeah. And so then they go week 2, all of a sudden they're down like 7-8 pounds in the first 14 days, and they're like, holy shit, this is easy, I can do this. And I was like, I lied to you. We're never going to count macros and calories. We're just going to keep doing what you're doing, eating real food.
Because it's working.
It's working.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then they let it go, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think, that's the most important thing is if you're somebody that initially wants to lose a lot of weight, right? There are literally changing anything that you're currently doing is going to impact that.
Right.
But if you want to keep it off, you have to be able to sustain it. So you have to come up with something realistic to allow yourself to continue to do that. Because a lot of people fall back into the old things because they're like, this is so stressful. I'm counting calories, I'm counting macros, I'm putting it in an app every single day. It's a lot of work for somebody that just can't sustain that. For a professional, absolutely. But
there's some weirdos that love data that like they kind of like that and it helps them, and that's cool. Like if that's your thing, do it. And honestly, like if you do it, you probably will get pretty dialed in and know what works for you. And actually, I found that like in general, like from my client base, like a lot of times women do a little better with more carbs than men. Like 40 and over, like a lot of men do really well on a higher fat, higher protein diet, and they're just super carb sensitive. I'm talking about people who like really need to lose weight, like not the average person, but somebody who's pretty healthy, who's pretty fit, they can bring in some carbs. Like carbs aren't the end all be all. I mean, carbs are not also like fat has been demonized as like, oh, fat's horrible. Like that's not true. But it's also not true that like you can't touch carbs. But like people don't understand that like when they think of carbs, they think of pizza and pasta and sugar and crap.
Right.
No, like I'm talking about like white potato, white rice, like sweet potato, squash. Like complex, good carb. Yeah,
carbs,
exactly.
So women, I think, would be happy to hear you say that women do better with carbs, right? Or can. But I think women generally feel like, okay, if I cut carbs out completely, that's what's going to make the biggest impact, right? But the truth is they feel shitty when they don't eat enough carbs, right? But they're like, but I'm losing weight.
Right.
But then again, it's not sustainable.
Right. So here's the thing. I think where women go wrong is
Where do women
it's
go
a slippery
wrong,
slope.
Yeah.
This is how much time do you got?
Careful how you start that sentence.
I better change I better change what I was going to say.
Where women go wrong with dieting.
Where women go wrong with dieting and dieting alone is I think that a lot of times what they do is they'll get in their mind that they're going to go low carb, but they don't realize that if you go low carb, you got to go higher fat. And so they go low carb and low fat and they feel like crap. Now, of course, you're going to lose weight because you're eating nothing, but one of the biggest things is if somebody wants to try a lower carb diet, you have to increase your fat. So again, in those first 1 to 2 weeks, I always have people eat like a ton of fat. And I'll tell them like, look, you might gain some weight this week or next week, but don't sweat it. Like we're in this for the long run, right? So like you need to eat more grass-fed beef, more wild-caught fish, more like eggs or duck eggs or something that has protein and fat together. Bring in some avocado. You can bring in some nuts and seeds, things like that. But cook your vegetables in coconut oil or ghee if you're okay with dairy, things like that. And you have to bring in more fat because if you're not bringing carbs for fuel, your body's looking for fuel. And if it's not in sugar form, it eventually goes to look for fat. And so you need to build up your fat stores. And then once your body gets in that fat burning mode, there's no sugar to burn. And so then it starts burning fat long term.
Right.
And fat is actually like a better, more sustainable long-term fuel for the average person, not an athlete or maybe not somebody who's training a ton in like distance running or not even distance running. There's more glycolytic type training. So like intense sport type training, you're going to need some carbohydrates.
High heart rate, like endurance.
Yeah, but I mean like some, for example, like some people even who like are more like a marathon runner or like really long and slow, like I say slow, like relative, right? But some people who are training for something longer and slower cardio, they can actually do pretty well once they get fat adapted. But they have to eat a lot of fat. And that's where people get wrong. So women are scared to eat fat, they're scared to eat carbs, you're not eating enough, and they're just super confused.
What do we eat?
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean that's where like, moving to real food, make your progress, up your fat, slowly lower your carbs, and then long term, somebody like that might want to look at your macros, like if you're not getting results. But I would say this, like give it 3 to 4 weeks eating real food, see what happens. If you don't lose weight or you don't get to where you want to get, then it might be a good time to count your macros and try to get dialed in. Also, if you had functional medicine lab testing in the beginning, you would know if your hormones are out of whack. If your hormones are completely out of whack, it's going to be really hard to lose weight or get lean no matter what you do.
Yeah. It's not something that is easily controlled. You've got to dig in a little bit further.
Right.
So you mentioned this doctor is it Bellevue?
Bellevue.
Okay. He has taught you a lot of things. You've taught him a lot of things. Do you continue to educate yourself and do research on this particular topic?
That's a good question. So, I mean, it's funny. Last week I had somebody who was kind of upset with me over something I posted, was like, well, what did you go to school for? And I'm like, what does that matter? Like, what did I go to school for?
This is a good topic.
Yeah. Like, what did I go to school for? I'm like, what did you go to school for? But I mean, so like even, there was a time in my nutrition and performance coaching business where I was kind of like, I'm not a doctor. I don't have like a PhD or whatever. And I kind of had this like imposter syndrome, like where I was scared to like really put it out there and like really share.
Yeah.
But then what happened is I was my own best client. Like I was getting results. Like I lived the part. I looked the part. I could speak from experience. And then I started to get more and more and more people where I helped get the same results that I did. And so then I had this like huge list of client testimonials. And then all of a sudden I had this huge list of pro athlete client testimonials. And I was like, all right, I know what I'm doing. These people are referring me. No pro athlete gives a shit what I went to school for. They just said, hey, like you got X so-and-so results. Like I want those results. Like,
can you get it done?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you get it done? And so I think the fallacy is that like we should be getting this information from a doctor. Like doctors, some of my best friends in the world are doctors. Like God bless them, I love them, but none of them are in shape. None of them know shit about any of this, right?
Funny. Yeah.
And I love them. They're way smarter than me. They probably did way better than me on the SAT or ACT, and like I could probably not even get into med school. But the point is like they don't have the functional knowledge of this stuff, and like it's just not part of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Like none of this is part of medicine. So I spent, probably 10, 15 years rigorously learning, always bringing new stuff into my head. And then eventually I was like, you know what? Like nothing's changed. Like none of the things that I believe in have really changed in the last 10 or 15 years. Mm-hmm. And so I think like I have a solid foundation of like what I need to teach, and I just need to keep sharing this with people. Mm-hmm. Now, I still, I've pulled myself out of coaching the last 2.5 years. I've stopped coaching. So in the last 2.5 years, I haven't really kept up on anything new or, trends. But to be honest, like my advice didn't really change in those 10 to 15 years. Like It was pretty much the same over and over. Now, when I talk to Dr. Biscup or other high level professionals, it's usually about like, what are you seeing anecdotally or like in your practice with XYZ? So for example, like this supplement, this diet, this peptide, this, that, what other? So they want to know, like, because some of those things don't have big samples of data or tests or research, they want to know, like, what are you seeing? Like, what have you seen? Who has this helped? And so that's a little bit different. But I would say on a daily basis now, I feel like I've put in my, 10,000 hours in this subject, and it's like, it doesn't need to be as freaking, like, it does not need to be as complicated as people make it.
Right.
Like, there's always going to be a new supplement. There's always going to be a new fad. There's always going to be a new thing. But lift heavy weights, sleep, and eat real food, and shit, your life's going to change.
You've seen the stuff that you've been preaching, teaching, learning about. You've seen it actually happen in real life, right? You didn't go to school for it, but you've seen it. You've seen the results actually occur, right? You're still taking care of you're still in great shape. Like You're a healthy individual. You have a lot of energy. But even though you haven't been educating yourself for 2 years, like obviously what you're doing is working,
right?
And that didn't come from school,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, so if you look at like health and wellness, like traditional doctor in medical school might have like a couple hours of nutrition training and like probably almost zero of supplementation and almost zero of like working out. Like I don't know what you want to call it, like exercise science. So I took some exercise science classes and was kind of like going to be a minor, and then I don't even know if I officially graduated with a minor in it or not. But the bottom line is most of the shit I learned is wrong. Like most of the stuff I learned is wrong. And like even Dr. Biscup, who's been a huge mentor to me and my personal doctor, he'll be the first to tell you that like everything he learned was wrong. With respect, not with respect to disease, but with respect to being proactive, with respect to nutrition, with respect to movement, with respect to sleep, stress, hormones, like all this stuff. That stuff's not in medical school. There's no section in medical school on like hormonal optimization and sleep and toxicity, and none of that shit's part of the deal because there's nothing you can sell on the back end to make that work, right?
Hospitals aren't making money by selling,
sleep.
Exactly.
I'd be a billionaire if I could sell sleep, man. It'd be freaking amazing.
Oh my God, I would buy all of it. So you, clearly health and wellness it really is a passion for you. I think that's obvious, right?
Yep.
So one would ask, why would you get out of that? Why would you, switch over to real estate? We can talk about that. But like, you've been through a lot of really hard shit in your life. Like harder shit than like anyone will ever have to deal with, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully most people.
So how has that just impacted where you are right now, where you want to go, what you want to do, all of that? Let's get real deep here.
Yeah. So I think, when you look at like why I stopped coaching, it got to the point where I feel like I said all I had to say. I was repeating the same shit over and over. And at the end of the day, I felt like I loved helping people, but it's also draining when people don't take your advice. Like, you can change this person's life and all they have to do is follow the plan and they don't follow it. And then you have the same conversation every week as to why they didn't follow it and why they might next week. And so then that kind of got me interested in like, I've always been also passionate about like personal development, mindset, like optimization as a whole. And so I feel like working out, health, wellness, optimization, that's one thing. But then there's like business and money, and then there's probably like mastering the subconscious mind and personal development. Like those are like three things that I've been passionate about like really a long time. And so I just got sick of saying the same thing over and over in the health and wellness space, and I wanted something more. And I also didn't see how I could truly scale that at the time. Now there's certainly people who are coaches who've scaled huge, like with online and media and whatever. But I just didn't want to do that. Like that just wasn't me. Like I enjoyed coaching people when they did what I said, but when I just
actually got something out of it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I just got sick of, like I spent a long time with professional athletes, Olympic athletes, and it's like you're at their beck and call, like nights, holidays, weekends, travel, and it's fun and it's cool at first, and then you wake up and you're like, how long am I gonna do this shit?
Right.
Yeah. And for me, I was at a point where like I hope to eventually have a family and things like that, and I was like, this isn't the path. Like this is not the path. And then I also started seeing people who were like having these crazy blocking factors. They know exactly what to do. I've told them what to do. They're not doing it. Why are they not doing it? Like self-sabotage or like something in their head is making them not do it. And so then I was like, all right, maybe I need to explore a little bit more the power of the subconscious mind. And so like I started kind of getting more and more into that. And then in 2019, when I had a crazy health scare, I saw every doctor there I could find. I went to the Mayo Clinic. I was bouncing around all these places. It was crazy. It was super scary. I literally thought I was dying. I waited through 3 different liver biopsies, to see what type of cancer I had and if there was treatment. So then I was like, all right, if I'm going to beat this, I have to get like really mentally strong. Like I have to like change the power of my subconscious mind. And so that's when I kind of went down this path of like Joe Dispenza and like all these other practitioners who are really into like mindset. And so then I had a period of time like 2018, 19, 20, where I was kind of more and more into that. And I just made the decision like after really 2019, there's probably 6 or 7 months where I did not work. I did not really do much except for try to survive. And I woke up and I was like, all right, what's important? What's important to, I want to have a family. I want to have a great life. I want to enjoy the rest of my life. I don't want to travel. I don't want to coach forever. Like I just made a decision, And so then I was like, what is the vehicle to help me do this? And I always came back to real estate. I always knew it should be real estate. I've been talking about it for even 17, 18, 19. I was talking about buying some more rentals, getting involved. I was getting ready to get ready. I just wasn't pulling the freaking trigger. Yeah. And so then after, facing death, living, waking up, literally at the end of 2019, it was rock bottom. It was like the lowest of the low, okay? Lost, I was weighed 130 some pounds, was skin and bones, felt like shit, like literally was like, I couldn't walk around the block. Like I was so weak and so tired and so beat up, I could not walk around the block. And so it took me a long time to recover. During that exact time, I went through a horrific breakup, like horrible breakup. And there was, she was divorced and had kids, and there was kids involved, and it was just really a bad thing.
Hard, yeah.
It was super hard.
Yeah.
And so between the sickness, the breakup, just kind of looking in the mirror, being like, shit, what's next? Like I put my last decade into this thing. I don't know if I want to keep doing it. I don't really know what my identity is. I don't know what's next. Yeah. And so at that point, I was like, all right, I need to do something big. And March of 2020 is when I just decided to like go all in on the real estate front. And it was also COVID.
Yeah.
So I thought like, all right, now, I'm single. It's weird. It's a weird time.
Yeah.
There's not much you can do.
I can't really be around anybody.
Right. There's nothing fun going on socially. You can't do anything. You can't travel. So I might as well go out. And I thought it was going to be like a 3 to 6 month push. But here I am like 28 months later. And, it was a 28 month push.
Right.
So,
How
here we
many
go.
houses in that period?
What's that?
How many houses in that period?
So we're at 170. Yeah. So just probably starting month 29.
That's a lot of houses.
That's a lot of houses. Yeah. So acquired about, well, it's technically, I'm exaggerating because it's only about 150, 52 houses, but 170 doors.
Yeah.
That includes,
Multi-family.
Yeah, like 1 to 4 units, but most of them are single family houses, a couple duplexes, a couple threeplexes.
Sure.
So
yeah.
So
that was just kind of your way of getting out of that phase, right?
Right.
Phase of your life, if you will. I mean, you dealt with 2 really difficult things at the same time. I can't imagine waking up every day wondering like how many days do I have left.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was on your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you made a conscious decision to, well, you survived it, right? You
Right.
had a pretty major surgery and like had to bounce back and like, you know, no big deal. We'll just
40% of your liver gone, no big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. Which I'm very curious how you're feeling now with that happening. But I mean, you went through this really shitty time where I'm sure like you just, I don't know how I would get out of bed every day, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
But you then chose to kind of bounce back and ask yourself this really important question, like,
Yeah.
what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Right.
It's one of those things. Yeah, don't get me wrong. There were some rough days. There was days where you feel sorry for yourself, days where you're depressed. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to do anything, and you're just pissed off at the world, you know. But at that point, you kind of have two decisions. Like, I'm either going to be the victim or I'm going to be the victor, and I'm going to make shit happen, you know. And so, you know, you got to worry about what you can control. And so I always say, and it's one of my favorite things, is like, pain is a hell of a motivator. Like, pain is an amazing motivator if you use it right. Mm-hmm. You know, and so you can either take pain and let it take you down this deep spiral of depression and feeling sorry for yourself and being angry, which a lot of people who have horrible circumstances, they're legitimately could do that. And they have every right to feel that way or to do that. But the alternative is you take that and you let that inspire you and make you angry enough to take action. You know, and I think that's what I did eventually. It wasn't overnight, but eventually I was like, all right, I'm sick of this shit. Like, I'm going to make something happen. And I also wanted to create something that, like, God forbid I had other health issues ever in the future, that I had something that ran without me that could pay me and I could be okay. So there's this story that I really like, and I've heard it many times. I think I've heard it from Tony Robbins. I've heard it from Tim Grover, who's well known for being one of Michael Jordan's personal coaches. And so Michael Jordan, obviously everybody knows, greatest basketball player of all time, or one of them for sure. Probably the greatest competitor of all time. I mean, just the guy has a crazy, competition. And The Last Dance just came out in the last couple years, and a lot of people watched it. Even people who don't appreciate sports. It was just an amazing documentary series about Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And I mean, the guy gets emotional like 25 years later talking about it. It's like insane, you know. You think like, oh, he doesn't give a shit now. Like, he won all his championships. Like he still cares, you know. It's incredible. But the point is that there's a story about how he lost multiple. I think it was I don't know if it was in the Eastern Conference Finals or the NBA Finals, but I think it was the Eastern Conference Finals. He lost to the Detroit Pistons multiple times. And there's a story of him after the game, like crying on the bus. Like a grown man, like crying on the bus in front of other guys who are all like ultra competitive, like tough dudes, right? And he was so freaking pissed that he said, never again. I'm never fucking losing to the Pistons again. And, he started eating better. He started lifting weights. I don't know if that's when he hired Tim Grover or what, but he changed everything. And he was known to be a real asshole to his teammates because he wanted to win so dang bad, right? And so to me, that's like the ultimate guy that took pain and like made it a motivator. And he's well known to like make stuff up. Like hear an interview where somebody said something and he twists it completely, like they're talking about him, and like he has a chip on his shoulder. He had to like make stuff up to keep a chip on his shoulder, just to stay motivated. And so I think it's one of those things where when I look at people, whether it's coaching them like in nutrition and performance, and they were to come to me, I always want to ask them a lot of questions because I want to know like how much pain are you really in, right? Like, did you just go through a divorce? Did you just get dumped? Did something serious happen? Did something seriously scare you? Like, is there enough pain in your life that you're actually going to change? Because if you haven't had enough pain, and that pain could be emotional, it could be actual physical pain, it could be you're heavy, it could be whatever. But people who haven't gone through enough pain aren't going to change.
Yeah. So you have a little checkbox on your intake form that says, are you in pain?
Yeah.
They need to be.
Yeah, and I ask it in different ways.
That's interesting, though, because pain really is what makes you grow, right?
100%.
And you almost need people. You need people to go through that. We all have to go through it. I think we spend a lot of time avoiding pain in so many different ways.
Right.
But I think one of my favorite things is you have to go through something to get over something. Yep. I have a 13-year-old. I tell her that all the time, but she just wants to avoid.
Right.
But then that all sits in you, and that resonates, and that, seeps into your muscles and your joints and your brain and your all of that. I think I was listening to a podcast you had where you were talking about stress hormones and like how those affect you. I mean, mindset affects everything, right? Michael Jordan took his pain and it changed his mindset in every situation and circumstance he had. You have to, it all starts right there. Right?
100%. Yeah. And I think probably I spent if I could go back and change anything, you talk about like learning and like my passion for learning, and this wasn't really my original path like through school, but I found myself through this, and during the height of my coaching, I guarantee you there was nobody like consuming as much information as I was. Like I'm really addicted to learning. I love learning. I'm passionate about learning, but only the things that I want to learn about. So school was like super boring and I hated it, Yet I'm a passionate, crazy learner. But it's just ironic because it's like, don't fucking tell me I have to learn the periodic table of elements or about the explorers or about some, the Pythagorean theorem or whatever. Like, no, I don't care about that. Like I want to learn about functional, real stuff. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's the bottom line is like people will not change until there's enough pain. And so, for example, I was in this mastermind group and there's this amazing woman who's super successful realtor in Montreal. And in the group, she was saying how her goal this year was to like 3 or 5x her business. So I mean, that's a big deal. Like, so, let's just say like you made 200,000. That means you want to make 600,000 to $1 million, right? Like that's a big jump, right? So, and she was like laying it out, all this stuff, and I was just like, whoa, wait a minute here, okay? Like why? Why do you want to do this? I'm like no, like why do you want to do this? Like what's going on in your life? Oh, she's attractive, she's comfortable, she's whatever. Like she doesn't need it. She doesn't need it. And there's no pain that she's gone through enough that's going to make her freaking change.
She just felt like she needed to do it.
It's the next thing. I felt like that for 10 freaking years. Like, oh, I'm going to grow my business a little bit. Well, I didn't need it. I didn't have to do it. I was comfortable. It was like, oh, you're successful. It's enough, right? But like, you always have to ask yourself, like, if somebody wants to like 3x or 10x their business or their any area of their life, like I'm a believer that like you are not going to do it until you've been through enough pain to make you freaking change. Because in order to 5x or 10x anything in your life, you have to make huge changes. And they're probably not as big as you think. Like they're probably minimal, but it's going to take huge discipline and huge sacrifice.
Yeah. If you keep doing things the same way, you get the same results, right?
100%.
You have to expect a change. So on the topic of education and real estate, how did you come to, I mean, you've made some of the biggest moves in terms of number of doors owned in the last 28 months, right? So like, how did you go from health and wellness expert to expert in real estate investing?
That's an interesting question. So going back to 2005, that was like when I remember reading the first book on real estate. It was called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. And it was a Keller Williams book, Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And really good book. It was kind of like the textbook on like how to invest. And I kind of did it. And I actually did take action. So the first house I ever bought, I bought it like owner occupied, but I actually rented it out. And then like I moved back in my parents' basement. I was like 24 years old, like mom and dad, I'm moving back in, but I bought this house that I'm supposed to live in, but I'm renting it out, And so, it was back then it was like, so that was like a pretty big first move for me, And then I had a couple more, but I just didn't really have a plan, right? So like I took some action, I got some experience, I learned. Now, this is going to date me, but like 2005, there was no YouTube. I think YouTube was like 06 or 07 maybe. But no YouTube, no podcasts, so you had to read a damn book. And I'm like, I'm going to fall asleep reading this book. So I only got so far. But I did take some action. So kind of what happened is like I knew enough to know that like real estate is a great way to create wealth. And it's something that just really takes discipline. And like you just have to do the same thing over and over. And it kind of can get boring. Well, the first time around, I maybe had, I don't know, like 5 or 6 units total. And it was one of those things where like I wanted to be rich. I wanted to hit a home run. And like it didn't happen in a year and a half. Like, why not? So I got bored. And I was just young. And I didn't know that I just had to keep hitting singles and just keep going and keep going. And so like I kind of jumped around and did other things. But then, through my nutrition and performance business, I had some very successful clients in real estate, including Jeff Cohn, Frank Klesitz, a couple other guys. And I was like, all right, like I know this is what I need to do. No offense to those guys, but I'm like, they're not that much smarter than me. Like I can do this, right?
Figure it out.
And so it was just one of those things where like I listened to Bigger Pockets podcast, I watched stuff on YouTube, and finally, like when I got sick in 2019, I was just like, all right, I know what to do. Just freaking do it. Just freaking do it. And I just took action.
Yeah.
And honestly, for a long time, I thought I need to have a partner. I need to have a mentor. I need to have somebody to do this with because I'm scared to do it alone and I might mess up.
Yeah.
And 2019 forced me to just do it. And I took action. And now, I mean, you know, I've actually surpassed most of my mentors. You know, in 28, 29 months, I've surpassed my mentors. And I was like begging them to like partner with them.
Yeah.
And now they're probably like, damn, we should have probably partnered with that guy, you know? But I just kind of did my own thing and took massive action.
Yeah.
And then all the other businesses I've been involved in, I've used those skills to help grow it. And I think the two things I took previously that I've done a great job with to scale this is using virtual assistants. So like I have had experience using virtual assistants and a virtual team. So I can have a lot more people work for me for a lower cost. And being involved in fitness, nutrition, and optimization, like details are very important. Like I'm a very, very detailed person, like anal retentive detailed person. And so I'm used to that, where I think most investors are more entrepreneurial, kind of, you know, like big thinkers, but they're maybe not great at the details. Whereas like I'm a little bit of both. And so like I'm a spreadsheet guy, I'm a detail guy. And so like I literally put together like all these systems and processes that have allowed us to scale very quickly.
Yeah.
And so I think those skills helped scale things.
Right.
And then the other thing that I'll be honest, like I really did learn from Jeff Cohn is people leverage, like how to recruit and train and hire the right people and how to give them an opportunity to make their world big in your world. Like what does Gary Keller say? He has a famous quote about this. It's like, give people the opportunity to make their world so big within yours that they don't want to leave. You know, so like my first big hire was my sister. And it's like, she did well, you know? And so I'm like, shit, like she approached me and I'm like, I don't know how I can pay you. Like, you know, and then like, you're my sister. If this doesn't work, I'm going to feel like a real asshole. So, you know, so like she's leaving a big city that she loves and this, you know, she had a pretty good life. And I'm like, all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to figure out like a small base, tons of incentives. And if you do well, you can make way more than you made, but it, you know, you're going to have to work. And so we came to an agreement. It's gone extremely well. And then my second hire, it was the same deal. My third hire is the same deal. And it's like, wow, okay. So what changed for me was just like hiring the right people.
Yeah.
You know?
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes you think
That's
one
an
thing and then
understatement.
I mean, managing people is difficult. But I think, you know, if someone's watching this and they're hearing about you, like, oh, great, he's blessed, he's operational, and he's like big thinker, and he's like super driven, I think that's okay. Like, I think what people have to do is understand what their strengths are, right? You know yours. But if you're somebody that's like big picture, entrepreneurial, has all these ideas, then you find somebody who's operational and who can carry out the details. And until you do, like you gotta, like if you really want to start a business, like you gotta be able to do everything.
Right.
But your experience has taught you that and got you there.
100%.
You've done it all.
Well, and here's the deal. Like, this is my highlight reel. Like, we could talk about failures all day long. You know, there's plenty of stuff I've failed. There's things I've lost money on, you know, but, you know, everything looks amazing in the last 28, 29 months. But, like, there was a road to get there, believe me. Yeah, there was pain. And there was many times when I was frustrated. Like, why isn't this working? Why am I not here? You know, and, like, you know, you shouldn't compare yourself to people. But, like, I worked with some pretty, like, high-profile, wealthy people. And so you become around that on a normal basis, and you're comparing yourself to, you know, people who are worth hundreds of millions, you know, like millionaires and billionaires, and you know, so it's good and bad, but you know, it's all relative.
It drives you, right? Because you see where you could go. But I think you know, something I've always heard is don't compare your first chapter to someone else's, you know, 10th chapter or whatever. Because they've been doing it for a while, so give yourself time to get there.
Exactly. And I think people too, you have to always look at, like, you know, the funny thing is, so many of my clients, like if I go back to like 2017, 18, those were like 2 years where I was still traveling a ton and coaching a ton. And that's when I really started to work with a lot of wealthy business owners. I'd work with like professional athletes, and of course they're wealthy, but like not all of them are super smart with their money.
Business.
Yeah. And so then,
Yeah.
like, I started working with these high-end business people, and I just had this itch, like, man, like, I should be doing this. Like, why am I not doing this shit? Like, I know this. Like, I should be doing it. And so it kind of eats at you. You know, like, I don't know the exact quote, but it's like, nothing is more painful than knowing what to do and not doing it. You know, and it could be with your body, it could be with nutrition, it could be with business, it could be with finance, it could be with the relationship, it could be with anything. Like, you know what to do, but you're not taking action. And so that's kind of how I felt like 2017, 18, 19, and finally I needed something drastic to happen to kick my butt into gear.
It sure did.
It sure did.
I'm sure you would never say you were lucky to have gone through that, but you've come out on the other side in a much more positive place. Not that it wasn't super positive before, but you knew there needed to be a change, right?
Right.
And that ultimately, I think, kind of was the catalyst for you doing what you do now.
100%. I have told this to a few people close to me in my life. I don't know if I ever would have done what I've done in the last 20 or 29 months if I hadn't felt the pain from 2019.
That's super powerful because
Yeah.
you had to come near death, basically.
Yeah, I had to realize there's an end. There's a freaking end. Like whether you're out there, like, you want to make more money, you want to start a business, you want to find a relationship, you want to change your body, whatever you want. Like, time is ticking. There's an end. Like, start today. Don't wait till the freaking trip. 2 weeks when the trip is over. Don't wait till the first of the year.
Right.
Don't wait till your birthday. Just fucking go.
Right. Don't wait till it gets easier. Don't wait.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't, hopefully come into contact with a near-death experience, I would say, I'm sure you would agree, like, you've got to figure out what your why is.
100%.
Right? I mean, you had your why through what you went through, but that takes time.
Right.
Like, you can't just sit down at the table for an hour and say, like, here's my why.
Right.
It's like self-reflection and figuring out what matters. So
I think, yeah, and like my why, like I feel like I've always been pretty clear on my why. Like, I want freedom, I want a big life, I want possibilities, and when I say freedom, I want financial freedom, time freedom, location freedom. Like, I want to live a life where I'm free, nobody tells me what to do, and I want to be able to support a future family and have, like, no constraints. So that's always been my why, but I just have a huge sense of urgency now. Okay, so I remember this, like it was yesterday, this like super pivotal moment in my life that literally probably changed the trajectory of my entire life. At the time, I didn't know it, but it did. So in 2018, I had been in San Diego for about a little less than a year, about a year. And I was working with a client there, but I was traveling a ton, doing a ton of coaching. Things were going well. I was involved in a couple other ventures as well. Everything was good. And I was like, all right, I love the weather. It was the best winter of my life, like living there through the winter. You've lived there. Yeah. But it was one of those things where I was like about to sign a lease at this, like, and like it goes against everything in my freaking being to like sign a freaking $4,000 lease, like for a 1-bedroom place.
For a studio.
Right. And so like I was always financially savvy and like knew what I should and shouldn't do. And I was like, this goes against everything I believe. But I literally saw this place. I loved it. It was high enough. It had a view of the water. Like, it was a beautiful place, like kind of Little Italy, between Little Italy and downtown of San Diego. Yeah. And I saw it twice. I was like, all right, drop the lease, sign it, or drop the lease, get it ready. They like emailed me everything. I had this packet, and I was supposed to go in to sign it, and I postponed it a day. And then I was like, man, this is really like a big decision, because if I sign this lease, I'm going to definitely stay here for the next year, and I'm going to travel from here. I'm going to grow my coaching business. Or if I don't, then I'm going to have to move somewhere. I could move back to Omaha. But my goal at that time was to probably get back into real estate. So if I sign this lease and I'm dropping $4,000 a month on rent, then I'm probably not going to do what I need to do to buy rentals in Omaha. And so I literally postponed it, and then I canceled it, and then the third day, I like drove back home.
Oh, shit.
I put my shit in my car, I drove back home. Half the people there I was friends with didn't even know I left.
You just made a snap decision.
I just made a decision. I'm like, you know what? If I want the life that I want, it's not to sign this lease. It's to go home, to do the shit I don't want to do, and to start working towards that. And it was a pivotal moment. It was like, stay here, have fun. Yeah. I would have had way more fun and had
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah.
But
where would you be a year from then?
Right.
I think it's really intelligent of you to think ahead to where kind of the future Terry would be, right? And you're thinking using that mindset as opposed to the present, the here and now. Because I think a lot of us sort of just live in where we are and we get super comfortable and content with it. But you thought about like, no, where do I actually want to be in 12 months?
Right.
From now?
It was a tough decision because it was I was going to have more fun. I was going to have a beautiful place,
So I've heard this term, burr.
Burr.
Did you come up with that?
Yeah, burr.
You did? Was it you? Yeah.
I did not invent it. Rumor has it that like David Green or Brandon Turner, they're bigger pockets guys. I think they may have invented it. So burr, what it stands for, it's B plus 4 R's. Mm-hmm. So it's buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. Okay, so you buy a property, you rehab it, you fix it up, you get it rent ready, and then you actually rent it. Mm-hmm. And then you go to the bank and say, hey, I bought this place in cash or fixed it up for cash, or you could have a line of credit,
Yeah.
But ideally you have cash or line of credit, or you borrow hard money from somebody else's money to do the deal and you pay them back. Right. But you buy the house, you fix it up, you get a tenant in there, and then you go to the bank and you say, hey, I have this asset, I want a loan on it. Mm-hmm. So the bank then orders an appraisal or an in-house valuation depending on the bank, and they will give you generally 80% of the value. Okay, so burr is amazing because it's one of those things where, I'm just going to use random made up numbers. Some people might hear these numbers and be like, what?
Yeah.
But for example, like you might buy a house in Omaha or Council Bluffs, Iowa for $65,000, okay? And then you need to put $20,000 into it, okay? So you bought it for $65,000, you put $20,000 into it, so now you're $85,000 in cash into that house. Mm-hmm. You then rent it to somebody, maybe you can get $1,200 a month for rent, okay? So generally there's gonna be still some cash flow there, like, on $85,000 in cash, we go to the bank and we say, hey, can you give us an appraisal valuation on this house? They say, yes, it is worth $120,000, okay? So they'll give you roughly $100,000 loan, okay? So what did I say, 85,000 was what we had into it?
Yeah.
65 plus 20.
Yep.
So 85,000 into it. And then the bank says, well, we'll give you, roughly 80% of 120,000. So it's around 100,000. Mm-hmm. Now they're going to give me a check for 100,000, but I only put 85 in it. Mm-hmm. So I just made $15,000 in cash.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that is called a cash out refi, meaning that like I get more cash from the bank than I actually even put in the property. And it's an amazing process. And people think, oh, like you can't do it. I mean, in our market, in Omaha, Council Bluffs, and surrounding areas, you can do it. And I've done it hundreds of times. Mm-hmm. But you have to find a good deal and you have to be able to add value by rehabbing the property. Right. And so my model is kind of like burr on steroids because I have my own in-house crew. And so I can save, 30, 40, 50% on construction costs. Okay. So my construction costs are low. I find off-market deals. We put the cash into the deal. We go to the bank. And our average cash out refi is around like in the last year, it's been around over $25,000 per house. Mm-hmm. We get $25,000 back more than we have into the house. Mm-hmm. Now, the beauty of it is then, the tenant is in there. No, if you were using like hard money or borrowing that money from somewhere, when the bank gave me that 100, if you were my hard money lender, I could pay you back your 85. Sure. So I still made the 15. Okay. And then there's a mortgage on the loan. I just make the monthly payment.
Mm-hmm. Which is covered by the renter.
Yep, which is covered by the renter, and then the positive cash flow you essentially keep or you reinvest. And so that's the burr model, and it's really, really an incredible model, and that's what I've done now, 170 doors.
Yeah. So I want to ask you how interest rates affect that, but I don't know if that's too long of a...
No. So interest rates don't directly affect the burr model. Mm-hmm. Interest rates more so affect your cash flow, right? Mm-hmm. So indirectly, obviously, interest rates could affect values. Like if interest rates get too high, it could drive values down. Mm-hmm. That's more in commercial real estate. But in residential real estate, it's more just based upon the market and like an appraisal, like what is the house worth. Sure. So interest rates don't affect it a lot. So for example, like the burr model is more based on the valuation. So like whatever the valuation is, 120, 140, 160, the bank is still going to give us, 75 to 80% of that back. Yeah. And we'll keep that and we'll get that cash out refi. Mm-hmm. But if the interest rates, have gone from 4% to 6%, then our monthly payment is higher. And so the monthly cash flow is going to go down a little. And so we either got to increase the rent or we're going to cash flow less.
Right. But it seems like it's less reliant on interest rates in terms of what you're pulling out from the cash out.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like the most genius model that ever existed.
It's amazing. And like, I thought when I first heard that, I thought, because most people think that like, if I'm going to invest in real estate, I got to have a shit ton of money. Like I got to have millions of dollars because, you know, if I have 100,000, then the most real estate I could possibly ever buy would be maybe $1 million of real estate because I only have 100,000, or no, not even. Actually, technically, if you had 100,000, the most real estate you could buy would be 500,000 because you would need a 20% down payment. Okay. So that's what most people think. Like, I need my cash to put in a down payment, and I have to put 20 to 25% down, right? And then I have to do the rehab. So most people think like you need millions of dollars or hundreds and hundreds of thousands to even get started. I mean, when I got started, I had to save some money, but I wasn't a millionaire at the time, you know, and so it's one of those things where I put the money in, I got it back. I put the money in, I got it back. And then it just keeps growing and growing and growing because like when you're making 20 here, 10 there, whatever, like you're growing your money instead of leaving it in the deals.
Right.
You know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you can't pull it out at that time, right? And then it goes into the bank, then you buy more and it just keeps building.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's really an incredible model because also your returns can be infinite. So on my 170 deals, if you go across all of them, because I found off-market deals and I paid for marketing to find off-market deals, and because I own a construction company and we save money on construction, if you go across all my 170 doors, I essentially have zero of my original money in those deals because I created the 20% down payment or more through finding an off-market deal, through doing the construction. And so if my portfolio, you know, let's say it's worth $25 million or whatever, the average person would think, shit, like that means you have $5 million of your own money in the, no, I don't. I have zero of my own money put in there because we created the value along the way.
Right.
You know, so
you pulled it out at each step of the way. Yeah. It's incredible. It's kind of like, why aren't more people doing this?
Sometimes I do ask, like, why isn't everybody doing this? You know, but here's the deal. It's not easy. Like, you have to be very disciplined. You have to be very methodical. It's not fun. It's not sexy. I mean, like, you're doing this awesome reality show with this fun design stuff and like these fun projects. And it's like, people think that's what I do. No, like, I go into hoarder houses and find dead rats and like human feces.
Bad
like
stuff.
you're doing like cool design stuff, but like that's not what I do, right? So like there's a huge difference between like HGTV fun stuff and like what I do. And I think like the problem is like what I do is very mundane. It's the same stuff over and over. Property management sucks. Like, you know, it's not fun, but it just makes very good financial sense.
Yeah. And I think the fact that you do the property management probably saves you a lot.
Ton,
a lot of people might choose not to do that because it is a pain in the ass.
It's a huge pain.
Yeah.
It's a huge pain.
But that's just one way you can make a decision to kind of capture that cost. Lower your overhead.
Yeah. And so, I mean, so one thing I would love to talk about just on this subject is, you know, big time real estate investors, like they make millions of dollars on cash out refinances. And so I think like people need to understand the power of cash out refis. So there's a lot of people who want to do flips, right? Yeah. So a person who buys a flip, they buy a house, they fix it up, they take a ton of risk because a flip might take 3, 4, 5 months, you know, if you do it right. And then you're at the mercy of the market. Does the market go up? Does it go down? Like when you sell it, you know, you could make money, you could lose money, it could be a disaster, you could hold it for a year. But if you make money, you pay taxes, and now you're unemployed, right? Because you get to find your next flip, right? Yeah. So like it's different if you're like a realtor and you're always finding stuff. But the bottom line is like I think flips suck because you got to find the house, you do the work, it takes 3, 4, 5 months. Even if you make 50 grand, you go pay tax, it's over. Where's my next deal, right? Yeah. So I love the cash out refi model because I get the flip profit through cash out refi money, essentially. You know, maybe not quite as much, but a cash out refi is not taxed. So a cash out refi, because it's loan money, it's not taxed. So that is essentially tax-free money that comes into your business. So it's an amazing model, and that's how like super, super big time real estate investors make millions or hundreds of millions of dollars and don't pay tax on it because it's all through leverage of cash out refi.
And that's that residual income you were talking about, right? As the renters continue to pay, right? You have the increases above what you're actually paying for
Yeah.
that, and it continues as opposed to selling and then you're done.
Right. And it's flipping or stuff like that. Like it's a way to make cash, but again, you pay your tax and then you start over. Whereas holding, that's where wealth creation is. So it's interesting because when you look at like flips, flips create cash out refi, that also creates cash, but it's actually not taxable, but it's still not wealth. The wealth is created through like the power of owning real estate long term. And so this is what I think, like even some of my like super successful friends who make a lot of money, the difference between like cash and wealth is like there's people that make a lot of money, like they have a high income, they're W-2, but they get destroyed on taxes. They live a high life, they have expensive cars, expensive houses, whatever, and at the end of the day, they have nothing left. And so they have to keep doing that shit over and over and over. Like doctors and lawyers are notorious for like making a lot of money, spending it all, right? And then they have to do the same shit till they're 65 or 70, and they wake up and they're like, damn, that sucked.
Right.
Whereas the power of real estate is like somebody who, you don't have to be a genius, you just have to follow the model and repeat it over and over. And the power of it, there's really like 4 or 5 pieces to it, okay? So the biggest power is the appreciation of the asset, okay? Omaha, Midwest is not gonna have the same appreciation as like the coasts, There's big cities where you can buy something for one price and it doubles in 2 years or 3 years. Omaha, maybe you get anywhere from 5 to 10% appreciation year over year. That's still pretty good because like if I buy a house for 100,000, next year it's worth 105, and then next year it's worth more, and then it's worth more. So the asset is appreciating over time, even though I'm not like essentially doing anything. I'm just like managing it, letting it sit there. Then the power of it for tax purposes is there's something called depreciation in real estate. And it's this made up tax thing that essentially rich people and the government made up, and it's a tax law. And I mean, there's legitimacy to it, and it's 100% legal, but you get depreciation. So an asset, they're saying that if you buy a real estate asset, you can depreciate it over 27 and a half years. So meaning that like, let's just call it 25 years. So let's just say you buy a $100,000 asset divided by 25 is 4,000, okay? So I can write off on my taxes, every house I have that's worth 100,000, I get a $4,000 a year write off on my taxes. So if you have 20 houses, that's $80,000 a year, right? So depreciation is a huge tax benefit to somebody who makes money. So that's why real estate investors, even if they make a lot of money, they don't generally pay a lot of taxes because of depreciation. Totally legal, totally acceptable. So you have the appreciation, you have the depreciation, and then you have the debt pay down. So the beauty of the debt pay down is that like, if I get a mortgage for 75 or 80% of the value, the tenant is paying it down each month after month after month. I put all my stuff on like a 20-year amortization. You could do 15, some banks do 25 or 30. Most investment stuff is like 15 to 20, whereas like a traditional mortgage is 30. But on a 20-year note, you're paying stuff down pretty quick. So every month, the tenant is paying it down. So the asset's going up in value, but the debt's going down, right? And then you got the depreciation, and then the final piece, which we talked about earlier, is the cash flow. So, our average cash flow per door is about $380 per door, meaning that like the money coming in is about $380 higher than the expenses. And that's pretty high because we self-manage everything. Right? But so you have those benefits, and like it's unlike any other investment, right? Like the tax benefits, the appreciation, the depreciation, the debt pay down, the cash flow, like there's so much to it that's incredible. And so that's why, I'm so passionate about it now.